Hi. The second essay in The Art of Literature is titled On Authorship. It consists of selections from Pererga, Schopenhauer's later work, from a section titled On Writing and Style, and it's about 2,900 words long in T. Bailey Saunders' English translation. In this first section of On Authorship, Schopenhauer contrasts authors who write for the sake of their subject with authors who write for money or for the sake of writing. He says authors who write merely to cover paper. Here's what Schopenhauer has to say. There are, first of all, two kinds of authors, those who write for the subject's sake and those who write for writing's sake. While the one have had thoughts or experiences which seem to them worth communicating, the others want money, and so they write for money. Their thinking is part of the business of writing. They may be recognized by the way in which they spin out their thoughts to the greatest possible length, then too by the very nature of their thoughts, which are only half-true, perverse, forced, vacillating, again, by the aversion they generally show to saying anything straight out, so that they may seem other than they are. Hence their writing is deficient in clearness and definiteness, and it is not long before they betray that their only object in writing at all is to cover paper. This sometimes happens with the best authors, now and then, for example, with Lessing in his Dramaturgie, and even in many of Jean Paul's romances. As soon as the reader perceives this, let him throw the book away, for time is precious. The truth is that when an author begins to write for the sake of covering paper, he is cheating the reader, because he writes under the pretext that he has something to say. Writing for money and reservation of copyright are, at bottom, the ruin of literature. No one writes anything that is worth writing unless he writes entirely for the sake of his subject. What an inestimable boon it would be if in every branch of literature there were only a few books, but those excellent. This can never happen as long as money is to be made by writing. It seems as though the money lay under a curse, for every author degenerates as soon as he begins to put pen to paper in any way for the sake of gain. The best works of the greatest men all come from the time when they had to write for nothing or for very little. And here, too, that Spanish proverb holds good, which declares that honor and money are not to be found in the same purse. Honor y provecho no caben en un saco. The reason why literature is in such a bad plight nowadays is simply and solely that people write books to make money. A man who is in want sits down and writes a book, and the public is stupid enough to buy it. The secondary effect of this is the ruin of language. A great many bad writers make their whole living by that foolish mania of the public for reading nothing but what has just been printed. Journalists, I mean. Truly a most appropriate name. In plain language, it is journeymen, day laborers. A good writer, Schopenhauer tells us, will be focused upon his subject to the exclusion of all else, most especially to the exclusion of any personal interest or profit or gain that he might make from writing. Bad motives, he suggests, lead to bad style, to bad writing, to a style of writing that is wordy, that is unclear, that goes on, that's unworthy of being read. She says, when you as a reader discover that this is what's happening, really simply throw the book away. It's no longer worth your time. It might help us to remember that at this period in his life, Schopenhauer was independently wealthy and did not have to write in order to earn his living. In the next section of this essay on authorship, Schopenhauer will make a new division of three kinds of author according to the relation between their activity of writing and their activity of thinking. Some writers, he'll say, write without thinking, some writers write while they're thinking, and some, rare high-quality authors, write only after they have done some thinking. Here's what Schopenhauer says. Again, it may be said that there are three kinds of authors. First come those who write without thinking. They write from a full memory, from reminiscences. It may be even straight out of other people's books. This class is the most numerous. Then come those who do their thinking whilst they are writing. They think in order to write, and there is no lack of them. Last of all come those authors who think before they begin to write. They are rare. Authors of the second class who put off their thinking until they come to write are like a sportsman who goes forth at random and is not likely to bring very much home. On the other hand, when an author of the third or rare class writes, it is like a battue. Here, the game has been previously captured and shut up within a very small space, from which it is afterwards let out, so many at a time into another space, also confined. The game cannot possibly escape the sportsman. He has nothing to do but aim and fire. In other words, write down his thoughts. This is a kind of sport from which a man has something to show. But even though the number of those who really think seriously before they begin to write is small, extremely few of them think about the subject itself. The remainder think only about the books that have been written on the subject, and what has been said by others. In order to think at all, such writers need the more direct and powerful stimulus of having other people's thoughts before them. These become their immediate theme, and the result is that they are always under their influence, and so never, in any real sense of the word, are original. But the former are roused to thought by the subject itself, to which their thinking is thus immediately directed. This is the only class that produces writers of abiding fame. It must of course be understood that I am speaking here of writers who treat of great subjects, not of writers on the art of making brandy. Unless an author takes the material on which he writes out of his own head, that is to say, from his own observation, he is not worth reading. Book manufacturers, compilers, the common run of history writers, and many others of the same class, take their material immediately out of books, and the material goes straight to their fingertips without even paying freight or undergoing examination as it passes through their heads, to say nothing of elaboration or revision. How very learned many a man would be if he knew everything that was in his own books. The consequence of this is that these writers talk in such a loose and vague manner that the reader puzzles his brain in vain to understand what it is of which they are really thinking. They are thinking of nothing. It may now and then be the case that the book from which they copy has been composed exactly in the same way, so that writing of this sort is like a plaster cast of a cast, and in the end, the bare outline of the face, and that too hardly recognizable, is all that is left to your Antinous. So it is only this rare third class of writers that actually has any product of thought to share with us, the reader. We would not expect to get anything really valuable from the second class, and certainly not from the first class, who write without thinking at all. Schopenhauer uses a word here that I did have to look up, and that is battue. That's a French loan word in English, and it refers to the activity of beating the bushes to flush out game. And whatever we might think, as Schopenhauer uses it here, it seems to refer to an organized activity, a kind of hunt, where the game is captured ahead of time, put into an enclosure, let out of the enclosure, and then hunted in a defined space of the hunter's own choosing. Now, whatever we might think of that as a sport, it is Schopenhauer's metaphor, and I think a very good one, for the activity, the writing activity of the author who's thought through and gained knowledge of his subject before writing about it. He is like someone who is hunting game that has already been captured, has already been confined, and is now being let out in a very predictable way for him. We might say in a more earthy American metaphor, he's shooting fish in a barrel. Right? It's impossible to miss. Why? Because all the preparation has been done. The game has been captured. It has been tamed, but it's been placed where it can be very easily dispatched. So the entire project of writing then doesn't involve go seeking out birds to try to find a way to get close enough to wing them, but rather already having them confined. The ideas are already in the head of the author. He simply lets them out, and the act of writing is this act of hunting birds through this method of Batu. Among writers of this third class, though, Schopenhauer tells us, not even all of them are worth reading, because some of them, although they have thought, they've only thought about the books, about the texts that have been written, things that other people have thought and written about the topic at hand. They haven't thought about the topic itself. So it seems that truly exceptional authors worthy of our attention and able to educate us are going to be relatively rare. And I think here as elsewhere, Schopenhauer is kind of subtly placing himself forward as an example of just this kind of writer, motivated by the subject itself, and writing, he thinks, with this kind of style. In the next section of the essay, Schopenhauer will warn us against the popular prejudice for books that are recent over the classics and books that are older. Here's what he writes. Let compilations be read as seldom as possible. It is difficult to avoid them altogether, since compilations also include those textbooks which contain in a small space the accumulated knowledge of centuries. There is no greater mistake than to suppose that the last work is always the more correct, that what is written later on is in every case an improvement on what was written before, and that change always means progress. Real thinkers, men of right judgment, people who are in earnest with their subject, these are all exceptions only. Vermin is the rule everywhere in the world. It is always on the alert, taking the mature opinions of the thinkers and industriously seeking to improve upon them, save the mark, in its own peculiar way. If the reader wishes to study any subject, let him beware of rushing to the newest books upon it, and confining his attention to them alone, under the notion that science is always advancing, and that the old books have been drawn upon in the writing of the new. They have been drawn upon, it is true, but how? The writer of the new book often does not understand the old books thoroughly, and yet he is unwilling to take their exact words, so he bungles them, and says in his own bad way that which has been said very much better and more clearly by the old writers, who wrote from their own lively knowledge of the subject. The new writer frequently omits the best things they say, their most striking illustrations, their happiest remarks, because he does not see their value or feel how pregnant they are. The only thing that appeals to him is what is shallow and insipid. It often happens that an old and excellent book is ousted by new and bad ones, which, written for money, appear with an air of great pretension and much puffing on the part of friends. In science, a man tries to make his mark by bringing out something fresh. This often means nothing more than that he attacks some received theory which is quite correct, in order to make room for his own false notions. Sometimes the effort is successful for a time, and then a return is made to the old and true theory. These innovators are serious about nothing but their own precious self. It is this that they want to put forward, and the quick way of doing so, as they think, is to start a paradox. Their sterile heads take naturally to the path of negation, so they begin to deny truths that have long been admitted. The vital power, for example, the sympathetic nervous system, generatio equivoca, Bichat's distinction between the working of the passions and the working of intelligence, or else they want us to return to crass atomism, and the like. Hence, it frequently happens that the course of science is retrogressive. To this class of writers belong those translators who not only translate their author, but also correct and revise him, a proceeding which always seems to me impertinent. To such writers I say, write books yourself which are worth translating, and leave other people's works as they are. The reader should study, if he can, the real authors, the men who have founded and discovered things, or at any rate, those who are recognized as the great masters in every branch of knowledge. Let him buy second-hand books, rather than read their contents in new ones. To be sure, it is easy to add to any new discovery. Inventis aliquid addere facile est. And therefore, the student, after well mastering the rudiments of his subject, will have to make himself acquainted with the more general additions to the knowledge of it. And in general, the following rule may be laid down here as elsewhere. If a thing is new, it is seldom good, because if it is good, it is only for a short time new. One insight that I take from this section is that wisdom is rare, and there's no special reason to suppose that we would find it nearby to us in time. That we wouldn't expect that the wisest person to write about a certain topic would necessarily be a contemporary or of ours or someone from our recent past. So that, I think, is one way of thinking about this prejudice for the recent, for the contemporary, that Schopenhauer warns us against here. Oftentimes, it seems our contemporaries also misread past works. So even if I am relying upon other people to relate to me what has been said in the past, I can't necessarily trust them to get it right. Or they would bungle the transmission, he says, not get the ideas quite right. They would distort them in some fashion. There is also, of course, the problem of mercenary writers, writers who write for money, which means attracting popular attention, which means saying something shocking or unusual or controversial, which often means simply denying something which is quite obviously true and well accepted. So the whole incentive structure behind that kind of popular writing for popular acclaim is not going to lead us towards the truth. And I think Schopenhauer is right to point that out. Popular pressure, he says, for publication can lead to a kind of retrogression in science, where we have a social structure set up where we're not getting books that are getting closer and closer to the truth, but rather just the opposite, that are taking us farther and farther away from the truth. That's what we should expect when we look at that kind of literature. This section also contains Schopenhauer's attack on translators who distort or alter the meaning of what they're translating. We might recollect that T. Bailey Saunders mentioned that there would be an attack like this, and here it is. Saunders thinks he can be exempted from it because of the care with which he applied his adaptation of Schopenhauer's work. And in general here, I think Schopenhauer's rule is that the new and the good are generally not going to overlap very much. If we're looking for quality work, we should be looking at older works rather than recent works. In the next section, Schopenhauer will speak a little bit about the nature of titles and titling a work, and then he'll give us one of the main metaphors of this essay, which is about the matter of a book contrasted with the form of the book. Here's what he writes. What the address is to a letter, the title should be to a book. In other words, its main object should be to bring the book to those amongst the public who will take an interest in its contents. It should therefore be expressive, and since by its very nature it must be short, it should be concise, laconic, pregnant, and if possible give the contents in one word. A prolix title is bad, and so is one that says nothing, or is obscure and ambiguous, or even, it may be, false and misleading. This last may possibly involve the book in the same fate as overtakes a wrongly addressed letter. The worst titles of all are those which have been stolen. Those, I mean, which have already been borne by other books. For they are, in the first place, a plagiarism, and secondly, the most convincing proof of a total lack of originality in the author. A man who has not enough originality to invent a new title for his book will be still less able to give it new contents. Akin to these stolen titles are those which have been imitated, that is to say, stolen to the extent of one half. For instance, long after I had produced my treatise On Will in Nature, Ørsted wrote a book entitled On Mind in Nature. A book can never be anything more than the impress of its author's thoughts, and the value of these will lie either in the matter about which he has thought, or in the form which his thoughts take. In other words, what it is that he has thought about it. The matter of books is most various, and various also are the several excellences attaching to books on the score of their matter. By matter I mean everything that comes within the domain of actual experience. That is to say, the facts of history and the facts of nature, taken in and by themselves, and in their widest sense. Here it is the thing treated of which gives its peculiar character to the book, so that a book can be important, whoever it was that wrote it. But in regard to the form, the peculiar character of a book depends upon the person who wrote it. It may treat of matters which are accessible to everyone and well known, but it is the way in which they are treated, what it is that is thought about them, that gives the book its value, and this comes from its author. If, then, from this point of view, a book is excellent and beyond comparison, so is its author. It follows that if a writer is worth reading, his merit rises just in proportion as he owes little to his matter. Therefore, the better known and the more hackneyed this is, the greater he will be. The three great tragedians of Greece, for example, all worked at the same subject matter. So when a book is celebrated, care should be taken to note whether it is so on account of its matter or its form, and a distinction should be made accordingly. Books of great importance on account of their matter may proceed from very ordinary and shallow people, by the fact that they alone have had access to this matter. Books, for instance, which describe journeys in distant lands, rare natural phenomena or experiments, or historical occurrences of which the writers were witnesses, or in connection with which they have spent much time and trouble in the research and special study of original documents. On the other hand, where the matter is accessible to everyone, or very well known, everything will depend upon the form, and what it is that is thought about the matter will give the book all the value it possesses. Here, only a really distinguished man will be able to produce anything worth reading, for the others will think nothing but what anyone else can think. They will just produce an impress of their own minds, but this is a print of which everyone possesses the original. However, the public is very much more concerned to have matter than form, and for this very reason it is deficient in any high degree of culture. The public shows its preference in this respect in the most laughable way when it comes to deal with poetry, for there it devotes much trouble to the task of tracking out the actual events or personal circumstances in the life of the poet which served as the occasion of his various works. Nay, these events and circumstances come in the end to be of greater importance than the works themselves. And rather than read Goethe himself, people prefer to read what has been written about him, and to study the legend of Faust more industriously than the drama of that name. And when Bürger declared that people would write learned disquisitions on the question who Leonora really was, we find this literally fulfilled in Goethe's case, for we now possess a great many learned disquisitions on Faust and the legend attaching to him. Study of this kind is, and remains, devoted to the material of the drama alone. To give such preference to the matter over the form is as though a man were to take a fine Etruscan vase, not to admire its shape or coloring, but to make a chemical analysis of the clay and paint of which it is composed. The attempt to produce an effect by means of the material employed, an attempt which panders to this evil tendency of the public, is most to be condemned in branches of literature where any merit there may be lies expressly in the form, I mean in poetical work. For all that, it is not rare to find bad dramatists trying to fill the house by means of the matter about which they write. For example, authors of this kind do not shrink from putting on the stage any man who is in any way celebrated, no matter whether his life may have been entirely devoid of dramatic incident, and sometimes even they do not wait until the persons immediately connected with him are dead. So Schopenhauer tells us here that the matter of a book is the topic, the knowledge. This is impersonal, it is objective, and it is fixed. The book is about what it's about, and it can relay what it can relay. The form of the book is the style or the flair with which this information, with which this knowledge is presented. This is personal, this is subjective, this is what both requires and demonstrates the skill of the author. And I think one of the valuable results of this metaphor is that Schopenhauer reminds us that a book can be interesting because of its matter or because of its form, and we as readers ought to pay attention to which it is, whether there's a combination between them. A book can be quite interesting simply because of its matter. It deals with knowledge and things which are rare or difficult to come by. And so we are so anxious to have this information from the author that the style in which the author presents it really doesn't matter to us too much. We're still rapt with attention, where we're invested in the book for just that reason. At the other end of the spectrum, we might have a book about a very commonplace subject, which is widely known, but which can be presented in a style with a certain kind of flair of writing and expression that holds our interest. And he indicates this is actually the character of ancient Greek drama, the dramatists that have returned to us. They're writing about things that we all know about and experience, but they're presenting them in a way which holds our attention. So it would be well for us to keep in mind both the objective and the subjective appeal, both the matter and the form appeal of a particular work of literature that we're evaluating. The best authors, he tells us, are the ones who deal with relatively ordinary matter, but with a superlative style and form. This is really where you see the touch of genius and of the master, to take something ordinary and present it in such an extraordinary way that it holds our attention and wins our praise. The common people, unfortunately, he says, are very much attracted to the matter of something. So they will focus upon that to the exclusion of style, and this is the reason why popular culture, he thinks, in his own time, and we might say in ours as well, is so dull and insipid. It has to appeal to that sort of popular prejudice for new and interesting matter, which is the kind of material for which form really doesn't, excellence of form is not really demanded. An example of this that I could think of might deal with our contemporary institutions of cinema. We might think that there are certain kinds of movies which might deal with ordinary topics, but in a very cinematically interesting way. And there might be some other kinds of movies which might make a great deal of money, which get all of their appeal from the topic, from the subject. So I might, speculating in my own time, say that a biopic about Taylor Swift is certain to make hundreds of millions of dollars. Why? People will go to see it because of who it's about. Whether it's a well-made movie or not, it's going to get the attention. Why? Because of the matter. The matter, not the execution of the matter, is really what attracts at that point. So one might, I can't think of any other good examples of movies which might occupy both ends of the spectrum. Great matter, but deficient form, or ordinary matter, but excellent form. If you can think of any, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. In the final section of this essay, Schopenhauer applies this matter and form structure to conversation. Here's what he writes. The distinction between matter and form to which I am here alluding also holds good of conversation. The chief qualities which enable a man to converse well are intelligence, discernment, wit, and vivacity. These supply the form of conversation. But it is not long before attention has to be paid to the matter of which he speaks, in other words, the subjects about which it is possible to converse with him, his knowledge. If this is very small, his conversation will not be worth anything, unless he possesses the above-named formal qualities in a very exceptional degree, for he will have nothing to talk about but those facts of life and nature which everybody knows. It will be just the opposite, however, if a man is deficient in these formal qualities, but has an amount of knowledge which lends value to what he says. This value will then depend entirely upon the matter of his conversation, for, as the Spanish proverb has it, "Más sabe el necio en su casa que el sabio en la ajena." A fool knows more of his own business than a wise man does of others. In this final section of the essay, Schopenhauer notes that matter and form in regard to conversation have the same inverse relation. If you have a great deal of knowledge and experience to share, you don't have to be especially witty in the way you share it in order for people to be attracted to and enthralled by your conversation. Or I might say, the more you know, the less charismatic you have to be in presenting yourself in society to attract and hold people's interest. As with books, the value of a conversation partner can come either from the matter that he talks about or the form, the style with which he presents it. That's the conclusion of my commentary on this essay on authorship. The next essay is on style, and I'll share that with you in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.